Hey, what's going on guys? It's Mark back in the coral room on Mark's Aquatics. Hope you enjoyed that last little video of these two laying that big batch of eggs that I put up last time to music. I thought I'd share that one with you. I don't think it's going to get millions of views, but there you go. I thought it might interest some people. But here we are again, we're back in their tank, and as you can see, their eggs have now hatched. And we've got quite a few babies up in a tank above, which we're going to go and look at very, very shortly. But I just thought I'd take you through the little process of how and what we do before we actually transfer them over, because like I've said in previous videos, the parents are very, very good at looking after the eggs, but when they hatch they become fair game and they will eat them as well. So what they tend to do is they hatch at night, if you didn't know. So in the wild they'll be looking after them, and what happens is as soon as the evening comes, 2 hours normally after the lights go out or the sun goes down, these little guys will start to emerge in their hundreds and literally just join the phytoplankton in the oceans and just drift away and just and start life on the ocean, up in the current and up in the mid-water sections, and just generally drifting around, picking off the phytoplankton and the rotifers and different things that are in nature naturally for them to feed on. And so what we've got to basically do is, when you get the slate like it is there on the eggs, you've got to time your, it's normally a week to 10 days before these guys hatch. Okay, so what you've got to do is you've got to wait until literally that evening when they're gonna hatch, or that night before. It can be within 1 or 2 nights of hatching, not really, it doesn't really matter that much, but you'll soon see, because it will just look like a silver mass. Normally when they're laid, as you saw in that other video, they're orange, and then they will go darker colour, and then they will get darker and darker, and then suddenly you'll start to see little eyes appearing as they grow in their little egg cases, and before you know it, between around 9 to 10 days, you'll see it will just be like a big silver carpet waving around, and that is very, very close. When you see the eyes, that's very, very close to hatching time, so that's a good indication as well. But what we're going to do once they've hatched, we've got to move, sorry, before they hatch, we've got to move that slate into the top tank or into another hatching tank, okay, before the night, so then you can wait for the morning and then you'll have a big hatch. Now there's various ways of doing this, okay guys. Some people just like to use the green water to hatch them in with the rotifers in. Don't worry about the colour of the water, because it's just the phytoplankton in the water. The water's still healthy, but you need the rotifers in there, and the rotifers feed on phytoplankton, and in turn the baby clownfish feed on the baby rotifers and the adult rotifers as well. So we've got to prepare that. Now personally, I don't bother with doing the green water thing, as I'll show you in a minute when I show you the babies upstairs. This tank looks a complete mess with the algae on the back. I've left that in there on purpose, because in this system I'm just doing like creatures and critters. It's not a show tank, so basically I want as much life in there as I can get, and with all the algae and different things on there, you get thousands of millions of copepods all over the glass. I'll show you some of those guys in a minute as well, and they will be naturally in your tank. And you can be too clean in a tank sometimes, and you can strip out a lot of these beneficial little copepods and things in there, okay, which your fish will naturally feed on. So what I tend to do is leave that, and it does look a little bit unsightly, but in wild we get lots of algae which grows naturally anyway, and it's only the tangs and various other fish that keep and graze it down, which makes it look nice and pristine as it looks. So it's always growing in nature. We've got to, I haven't got anything in there, which if I had a tang in there, you'd have eaten all that green algae by now and it wouldn't be in there, so it'd have polished the tank up. But because those guys are just in there, I thought I'd leave it and we'll go up. So I think what we'll do now is, guys, as you can see now, they've all hatched, everything's gone. I put the slate back in there for them, it keeps them happy. They'll soon clean off those old egg cases, and before long they'll be going again. But which is what happens when you get a pairing, and that's another thing. If you get a pair of clownfish, they're going to be breeding they're going to be laying eggs from every 2 to 3 weeks, okay, and you're not going to stop on doing that. If you've got a reef tank, it's going to be ideal, because obviously the fry are going to hatch. If you're not wanting to bring them on, you can then let them go back into nature. The corals will feed on them and everything else. And this is just, if you buy a pair, this is something that's going to happen anyway. You can't stop them from not laying eggs, so it's just added food for your system. But if you want to breed these little guys, you've got to do it slightly different. And so what we'll do now is we'll pop upstairs. Now these are super tiny, they only hatched last night, so they're like little shards of glass just buzzing around. The camera's probably not going to focus on them that well, because I've got a white background. If I'd put a black background on there, when I built the system, you'd have seen them a lot easier, but I'll try and get the best footage I can for you. And obviously as time goes on, we'll see them as they go through that metamorphosis and start to get their little bars, and that little colour starts to come in, which is normally around 10 days, 10 to 14 days, you'll see them go through that little transformation. But at the moment, we've got to be feeding them lots of rotifers, and I'll take you through that again in a minute, okay? But we'll go upstairs and we'll have a look at these babies. Okay guys, there you go. We've got quite a few out there. I'd probably say maybe 150, 200 maybe. There doesn't look like many there, but obviously I've just got you the best part of the tank where I've got the best focus, okay, with the light that I've got. Keep a dim light on these guys, okay? They don't want bright lights in there, so keep either a very low actinic blue light or just turn your lights right down, and that should be helpful, you know, to keep them going. You've got to add a lot of rotifers in here now, okay, the next day. Don't forget when they first hatch, they're relying on their yolk sacs from their egg case, which is attached to them, to their stomachs. They'll take that in slowly as they go around. They'll get a little bit stronger, and as you can see now, they're all free swimming, and there's no end of them in there. You're going to lose quite a few when you breed clownfish. You'll soon realise that you're going to get a lot of them that have come out the egg cases and they've got like twitchy fins, or their spines aren't right, or you know, they might be they can be deficient in a multitude of ways. But you're going to lose some, okay? I've got substrate on the base of this tank just because it's in there basically, but the best thing to do is, if you can have a clear bottom tank, you can go in there with a long siphon and siphon out the dead ones, okay? If you're doing it in a small tank, that's the best thing to do, is take them out. But because this is a bank of tanks with a big skimmer on and everything else, it's not going to get plagued by ammonia spikes or anything like that, and their tiny little bodies aren't going to make any impact on the water quality at all. But if you're going to be doing it, use a sponge filter. Make sure it's a cycled sponge filter. Don't be using anything, or if you're using another tank as you know, you can always put a big piece of sponge in the overflow. If you don't, you're going to get them all sucked into the systems or into your filters, and it's not going to be good. So make sure you use a very fine sponge filter on your downflow pipes. You can see, if I just twist this around here slowly and go up, you can see what I've got there on the surface. You can see I've got a piece of an old sponge filter there, which I've chopped and reversed over where the bubble tube would come out. I've stuck that on the top of the same gauge tube as I've used for my return to the sump, and that fits perfectly on there, so the water's getting strained through there and keeping them all nice and safe in the tank, okay? And that's what you want to be doing. If you're breeding these guys at home, don't forget, you can go just with some straight seawater in there, or water from the previous tank, or the tank that they were born in. Put that in there, leave that, because there's not going to be any waste going in there. You add in all live food, live rotifers and everything else. You're not going to struggle with ammonia for quite a few, well, for probably a couple of weeks, okay, because the live food's going in and they're not actually adding any load or bio load really to that water to make the ammonia spike at all, okay? You can buy these tiny little ammonia indicators which you can stick on the glass. It's a good idea if you're new to this game to put one of those on, because obviously if you get a tiny little bit of ammonia in that water, it's going to kill them fry off so quick. They'll just literally all be sinking to the bottom in a matter of hours. So make sure you get one of those. Now food wise, I've just zoomed in a little bit there, tried to get you a little bit more of a clearer picture. Now these things are super tiny. I've just focused in there a little bit on the standpipe, so you might get a couple of these little chaps coming past into focus. You can see they've got beautiful little blue tinges to them, and there's little silver swim bladder there, which you can see through their clear body at the moment. Well, now when they're born, they're clear, and they only, like I said before, they only go through that metamorphosis and they start to change into that little clownfish shape after a couple of weeks, okay, when you get them on more foods. Now we're going to start off feeding these guys the rotifers, like I said. I'll swing you around now. I'll show you my rotifer culture. Now I get my rotifers off eBay. There's various places on there. You can buy 1 litre of them, 2 litres of them, which is basically the salt water with the rotifers in, and they'll send you that through the post. But make sure you order some phytoplankton as well, because without the phytoplankton, the rotifers aren't going to breed. And with rotifers, you've really got to be on the game, okay? Because these guys will only eat rotifers because they're so small, and they're the only things that they can actually fit in their tiny little mouths to eat. Anything like freshly hatched brine shrimp, they're not going to take, well, they will take, but only about 2 weeks, maybe two to 3 weeks they'll start taking those guys, maybe a bit sooner. And but they're the only thing. So basically you need a culture of rotifers, and you need a lot of them, okay, because these guys will consume quite a lot. They're not very good for them nutritionally wise. Basically it's what the rotifer eats, which is the phytoplankton, which is what in turn feeds the baby clownfish, okay. So they're like little veggies when they're born. They eat the rotifers, they get a minute bit of like the protein or whatever from the skeleton and the internal parts of the but it's mainly the phytoplankton inside the rotifers that helps them feed, okay. So they're not very nutritious. So when you start adding those little baby brine shrimps, which are freshly hatched, they've got their yolk sac on them, and then in turn you'll see a big transformation in the little guys as they'll start growing a lot quicker when they get onto the baby brine shrimps, okay. But we'll have a look at this rotifer culture now, which I've got going. Right, there you go. It's probably about, I don't know, 20 litres, I suppose. This, it's quite big. We've got a slow rise of bubbles going all the way through it to the top, and a strip light at the back, which is obviously feeding the phytoplankton light. That's growing the phytoplankton, and in turn the rotifers are then feeding on that nice rich plankton in the water, okay. And they're going to breed then in their thousands. And then you're going to need one of these little guys here, one of these little guys, which is a micro sieve, okay, a rotifer sieve. You can buy these on eBay as well. As you can see, it's super fine mesh, and you just literally dip that into the water, raise it out a few times like this, and then you'll be capturing them in there. You can either do that, I just dip that straight into the top of their tank like so, and all the little rotifers then they just waft out into the water, and then they feed on them, okay. As you can see, they're busy little bees, always working around. You'll see some of them will be down on the base looking around in the substrate for these rotifers that are floating around. Some will be picking off the standpipe or off the side of the glass, because the rotifers will cling to the side of the glass as well. Or they might be spinning around in circles on the surface of the water, because a lot of the rotifers go up as they're drawn to the light. So they will go onto the surface, and they'll be whizzing around in little circles, straining them off the surface as well. So don't get alarmed if you see your fish whizzing around in circles acting silly. That's what they do naturally, okay, in your tank. So don't worry about that too much. I'll try and show you actually what they get up to. It'll be interesting for you to see. There you go. You can see the rotifers in little bits on the surface there, and you'll see them going up and straining. Some will be whizzing around, some will be going left to right, or just hanging there. What they'll do is they'll eat one, and then they'll just hang there. As you can see, that one on the left hand side looks like it's dying, but they're actually just chewing away on the food and whatever they've caught, and suddenly they'll spring back into action, shoot off in another direction, and carry on. And this is how these little guys go for the first week. So you've got to keep the feeds up to maybe 3 or 4 times a day, or if you're going to work, if you're trying to breed them at home, make sure you've got a lot of them in there, strain a lot of them out, put them in so they've got enough to feed until you come home, okay. And that way you're not going to lose as many. But like I said, there is quite a high mortality rate with clownfish, so be prepared for that, because it can be upsetting for some people. But this is all part of the breeding game. If you're going to be breeding fish, you're going to be losing things like you do if you breed anything. So if you're prone to that sort of thing and you don't like losing little fish and things like that, it's probably not a good thing for you to do. But this is how we do it in the trade, as it were. Obviously I'm not breeding these. I'm going to be breeding these to keep in the coral room here. I might sell off a few, see how many we get through the metamorphosis, and then I'll see how many we get through, and hopefully I can sell a few to you guys as well, maybe, if you'd like to take a couple of these off my hands when they're a bit older. But as you can see, they're very healthy, very whizzing around, and it's lovely to see them. Lovely to see them swimming around. I haven't bred clownfish for a long time now, and it's lovely now. I've got this coral room set up because I can do all kinds of different things. I used to breed basslettes as well, and different species. Banggai cardinals is an interesting one, which I'll get into later on. We'll breed those guys as well. They're a mouth brooding species, where they take them into the look at that silly one there. You see, he ate that rotifer off the surface, and he's spiraling down like he was like it was all over for him. But they do that, and they can they'll have you jumping off your seat, that's for sure, thinking, oh no, it's dying, and then it'll spring back into life. Fantastic stuff. Anyway guys, I think I'm going to leave it on that one for now. Mum and Dad's done a fantastic job of looking after them babies. The male's already cleaned off all their egg cases. She's nice and fat again. Oh, that's the point. A lot of you guys were asking me what I feed these to get them to the condition and everything else that they're in. Now I feed them a lot of mysis shrimp, a lot of ocean nutrition as well. I feed them that. Obviously different types of mixture. You can, I think there's so many different types out there of different foods. I use cooked prawns as well, a little bit of cooked prawn, chop it up into little tiny pieces, little chunks, and drop that in piece by piece. Be careful with that because you can pollute the water up quite quick. So make sure it's gone, and if they leave it, make sure it doesn't get blown under a rock or anything where it's going to rot down and give you a little ammonia spike there. So be careful about that if you're only using these small tank to breed in with a sponge filter. Yeah, really, it's just that's what I use. I use live copepods sometimes as well, just to give them a little bit. There's a lot of live copepods in the system, like I said, because I leave the algae and things grow on the back of the tank, which they in turn the copepods will feed on. I'll just show you some of those little guys before we end this video. There you go. That shows you a nice little collection there of different sized copepods, rotifers, all the little things that grow in this tank. Now in this tank there's nothing at all. It's just a couple of soft corals in there, mushrooms, a bit of star polyps, green star polyps, various zoas, and a little anemone that you can see on the right hand side here. But that's all that's in there, and so these guys will thrive in this system, produce thousands and thousands of babies that feed on all the algae and things. You can see the snail's been munching through that algae on the front there, all those little chomps out of it. But that's what you want. You want lots of live food. That will keep your fish healthy. It will keep it more of a natural environment for them if you're doing a breeding setup. And don't be too clean. Don't get your hands in there too much. I always say that people are in and out of their tanks too much, and this is why you end up with little crashes and different things, because your stuff going in your hands every 5 minutes, and it's not good. I'll show you the anemone actually. If I can rise above, you'll see the copepods are all over the anemone as well. There you go. You can see them all over the stem of the anemone there, just walking around. Look at that. Life. Miniature life in tanks. There's so much in your tanks you will never realise how much. Like I always used to say to me and my brother alike, we'd get up at night and we look in the tanks with a little torch or a dim light, and it's amazing what pops out in your reef tank at night, especially if you've got live rock. You'll be surprised what will come creeping out the rocks of a night for a feed, and then dash back in before light, and before you get up you won't even know they're in there, unless you go creeping, like I say, creep around at night and have a look what's going on in your tank. It's great fun. Now I've done series 1, 2, I think, and I think this is the third one I'm going to put on. I've got my playlists on there as well. If you want to go back and see right the way back from stage 1 all the way through to this, go back and have a look at my playlists. I'll link them all up in one little box there, so you can click on them all and watch them one after another if you like to do that. These guys have done a fantastic job yet again. With a bit of luck now, we'll get a few of these through the metamorphosis, and we'll follow them along and see how they get on. Okay. Anyway, guys, as always, you're all stars. Love you loads. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode of Mark's Aquatics. Bye for now.
Just me and my guitar.